everybody, I'm Topher. I work in community outreach here in Riverside, and I'm here today with Tammy George. I want you guys to meet Tammy George. Say hi, Tammy.
Hello.
How long have you worked with Riverside specifically, Tammy?
Riverside, about 2 years, June of 2023.
Okay. It's about time we meet you in video.
Yeah.
And to show you to the world. Speaking of which, we have somebody else to introduce to the world. Marie is here helping me out with this podcast.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I'm the patient engagement coordinator. I'm happy to be here today.
Tammy, if you would, tell us just a little bit about yourself and where you hail from and how it went for you getting into the mental health field.
Well, I grew up in Virginia, so lifelong Virginian. I really kind of got interested in psychology in high school, interestingly enough. And it was just one course I took, just a basic psychology. And it just piqued my interest in just like the brain and how much that plays a role in our development, in our mental health. I think part of it was also trying to figure out some family dynamics that I grew up in. So that really helped me at a very crucial time to figure some things out. And then I got married and had babies and waited a little while and went back to grad school and kind of figured out through that I really wanted to be a therapist eventually. So did all that a little bit later and completed that training in my late 20s and got my residency, a little bit later than that and got licensed.
Cool. And what's work history been like for you? I know your daughter actually is with Riverside too, and she worked in the public school system for a little while. And I know some of other providers have worked in different areas as they were kind of, early out of their training. What kind of course did you follow out of school?
Yeah, so after I graduated, I made the mistake of saying I did not want to work with senior adults or seriously mentally ill people. And that was my first population. I got a job working with seriously mentally ill senior adults in community mental health. It was probably the best thing because it was a fear-based way of thinking about populations. And so I learned so much. And I was in community mental health for many years. It wasn't a place I knew I wanted to stay in because for me, people don't leave. They don't typically get better at that level of functioning. They're very low functioning. They need a lot of supports in the community, but you learn so much about community resources and serious mental health issues. And you just really develop an empathy for the people and the families that are involved in that. But people don't get well, so they would typically be on your caseload forever unless they left or died. And so I decided later on that I wanted to go into private practice. We moved around some, so some things didn't get started, but when we lived on the east coast of Virginia, I started working in a group practice there for the first time. A little bit of dabbling before that in an eating disorder residential treatment program. A lot of things happened during that time, and the place ended up closing down within several months of me working there. So again, I had resigned by then, so it ended up being like the perfect timing for me to have resigned from there. And then I went into the group practice until we moved here and was in a previous group practice and sort of became a solo practitioner at that point.
What did you see over there that you would project forward as like solutions, for community mental health, or is it just dire,
It's such a complicated issue, as we see played out in the news, right? Where individuals in the country do not have the resources. I think a large part of it is there's just a lack of awareness about mental health in general and serious mental health issues like schizophrenia, for instance, specifically, that tend to lead to these kind of behaviors that we see in the news. It's a very small percentage of people who end up in the news. However, they still need access to resources, and especially with adults, that can be really hard because you cannot force them, not in the state of Virginia, only temporarily, to get treatment for maybe 3 days, 5 days, something like that, maybe a little longer. But in general, that's the hurdle that I think, one, people aren't educated. Two, patients have rights, so we can't force them into treatment. As far as individuals or practices, I think the best thing that we can do as providers is know where our limits are in working with that population, and being able to know when people need case management more than just therapy. Like, that's sort of what I did in community mental health. It was some therapy, but it was a lot of case management, finding housing and Medicaid and transportation and intensive in-home services and things like that. So we're not set up in private practice to do those kinds of services. So knowing that community mental health exists in every county, city in the state, knowing where that is and when we need to refer people appropriately to those resources is really important.
That's good. That's a strong takeaway. Yeah, just those relationships very much matter. With being able to connect the dots. When those people do come in and those cases become complicated, and having that reflex to get that continual care that they need from there to there. Marie, did you have any questions for Tammy?
I would say maybe what are some of your biggest takeaways, like being thrown into working in very an intense environment compared to here. What would you say are some key things that you took from that, an experience you had or some patients that you had where you first had this experience, you're like, wow, I'm really glad I learned that, because I wouldn't have been able to learn this in a private practice.
Yeah. I think things like psychotic episodes, those are things we don't see in private practice. And that was my fear, I think, in serious mental health issues when I was saying, I don't want to work, with SMI. It was really like these unpredictable, very severe, disabling disorders, which could, psychosis can happen with bipolar, with schizophrenia, with severe depression. And you're just not afraid. You see it for what it is. It's not dangerous. It felt scary thinking about witnessing it or helping people through it. But in reality, it was just a symptom like any other symptom. So understanding that and knowing I would have never had those kinds of experiences in private practice, because it is maybe one in however many years I've been in private practice now, over 10, maybe one person might have been diagnosed with that level of mental illness, but on the whole, they're usually either not treated or they're in community mental health services.
So of the patients you have now, do you see any recurring or things that you didn't have beforehand, when you first started in private practice compared to now? What are some recent things that you've noticed that are trending?
Well, for me, I would say a big one is adult ADHD. I don't know if it's I think it's more prevalent. I think COVID, when people started having to go to school and work from home, people became much more aware of how hard it was for them to deal with the symptoms of ADHD. So they may have gone undiagnosed their whole life and then found themselves in this situation where they could not self-regulate. Now, I'm not saying they didn't have the traits or the issues, but it started on a more catastrophic level to interfere with their functioning. So I think that's become more prevalent. And I don't know if it's because now the front desk knows that I work with adults with ADHD, and so I get more of them, or is it there's just more people coming to the practice with adult ADHD. So I've had a lot of personal relatives that have had ADHD. So sort of from my own personal perspective of wanting to know more about it and how to work with it and how to help people with it. But then professionally, as I started getting more and more adults, mostly women who are undiagnosed, because women typically present with inattentive ADHD, which in school will just look like you're being spacey, you're kind of out of it, a little ditzy, but make good grades. And so how could you possibly have ADHD if you make good grades? Well, you can. And girls are a pretty good example of being able to have the verbal capacity to catch up and put the dots, connect the dots and put the pieces together and still do well. I'm not saying guys don't get misdiagnosed or undiagnosed, but typically it's more females than males. So I'll see them and it sort of becomes a light bulb moment. They're like, oh my God, like all this time, like it wasn't me being lazy or unmotivated or lackadaisical, like it's been my brain this whole time. And so in a way it becomes a relief. And even into 30s and 40s and 50s, I've seen people who either were not diagnosed or didn't take it seriously back when they were enough to treat it. Until then it became problematic later on. So that's one. The second thing is, again, I don't know if it's because I don't think they're necessarily seeking me out for it, but because I'm much more knowledgeable about hormones, perimenopause and menopause, when I see women starting in their late 30s, definitely in their 40s and 50s, that is something that I assess for. So like I would assess for their family background, their history of depression, anxiety, trauma. I start to ask questions about their hormones because it is more of a conversation in the last 2 to 3 years. But 10 years ago, no. And still doctors are not educating their patients about it. So I usually want women to get screened, to gather information, to determine what role their hormones may or may not be playing in their mood issues, among other things. So 40% increase in perimenopause and mental health issues for women. So depression, anxiety, irritability is a big one. And things like the new onset of ADHD. So even without a history of ADHD, you start to have cognitive issues. With a lot of women will have cognitive issues, brain fog and stuff in perimenopause, which then can continue past into menopause. So those are two big ones. So the first one, I don't know if it's because I'm getting more. The second one, I sort of bring it up when I see, again, they might be sending me all the 40 and 50-year-olds at the front desk. So I don't know, it's not necessarily something that I think women are seeking help with, but I see that as a contributing factor a lot of times that gets overlooked. And I don't want to treat somebody for a psychological problem only if there's also something medical going on that can be treated.
Right. Yeah. I think it's not just front desk's fault. I've noticed our occurrence of more people seeking an ADHD diagnosis in adulthood. I think for a while, like people thought like it was something like, oh, just kids have this because they can't sit down in class.
Yeah.
But then as like the knowledge and like awareness grows, like people are like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
And like as you said, I think COVID really, really highlighted that for people. Yeah,
there
for
are
sure.
people who still think it's too much sugar, not enough exercise, it's red dye in the food. Like they don't really believe it's a neurocognitive disorder. So we're getting there.
So if we could get kind of, I guess, the age ranges and the types of folks you see right now as a provider, kind of given an overview of you are accepting new patients now, right? What kind of patients are you seeing now and having the most success with, and what resonates and makes you tick, and you see that efficacy? Who should come see you? What age ranges, types, things that they're dealing with?
Yeah, so I see 18 and older, all the way up through senior adult years. I don't have as many of those because I'm Medicare. A lot of times they want to go to a Medicare provider, but so yeah, mostly I see anxiety, depression, ADHD. Those are the three big ones. Anxiety disorders are the most common, probably the most underdiagnosed, because I think people just assume anxiety is what everybody does. I think people think everybody feels anxious a lot, and I'll kind of ask them about anxiety, and they'll kind of deny it a lot of times, but later on in the interview they'll say, I'm just a worrier. Okay. All right. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. So anxiety, depression, adult ADHD, obviously. I do a lot of grief work. It was something I became very passionate about in college. I did a study on that in college, independent study. So through the years, I've done bereavement support groups and different things. And so individuals who going through a grief experience, which could be a recent death, but it could also be an anticipatory thing where their loved one has Alzheimer's or cancer. Most often it's after a death that people come in and want to get some help because they don't really understand what it is and whether they're doing it right, which there is no right way to do it. But that's one that I typically, one of the passionate areas that I like to work with, because there's so much misunderstanding about the grief process. And we only think about it in terms of death or dying, when in reality, there's a lot of losses that come through our life: pets, homes, jobs, confidence, health. So there's a lot of things that can bring up grief and loss type issues. It used to be really difficult before COVID because you could not do telehealth at all unless you didn't live, more than 50 miles or whatever the insurance decided was the limit. And so there was no option. And then COVID happened, and that was the only option for 6 or 8 weeks. And then you couldn't put that back in the box. So luckily that's happened, because I think that, I was on the fence about that at first, but I think it's been proven to be just as effective as in person. So that's been a good thing that insurance has covered that, because they didn't up until COVID-19.
Yeah, that's got to have increased accessibility,
Yeah.
a ton, I would think.
I think anybody who's anxious socially who would not go to an office, maybe you can get them there through telehealth, but they won't even get in the office at first unless they have telehealth. So
That's a fair point. Yeah.
Just for a lot of different people, I know like some places aren't even like wheelchair accessible. So the fact that like they also have like the comfort of also doing that in their home, I feel like that's really beneficial for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So, this has been super helpful. And I think kind of a good comprehensive highlight. I definitely want to get back with you, or Marie, one of us get back and talk a little bit more about hormones and the stuff that's affecting that specific age range of women. Because I know that does seem, the fact that 10 years ago it was not in the conversation, and that now, it just seemed, I'm sitting over here, I'm not an expert for sure, but it seems like it's been, a kind of a foundational upgrade to care about that medical piece of their life in tandem, with evaluation, psychologically. And that's really cool. I want to spend some more time there for sure. For now, I guess bringing it home with, men and women specifically, maybe in Loudoun County, it's stressful. There's lots of things going on, and macro level, micro level. But I was on with another provider recently, and she was talking about how driven sort of the folks are in Loudoun County, and kind of, if you're not type A, you better be type A, sort of type vibe. And I guess I'm looking for some words that you'd leave maybe the women with in Loudoun County, and what you might say to them. And then I'll cut myself off for that ramble. But Um, what might you say to women living in your area there as they kind of wrap up the summer season and get into the fall?
Well, I would just say that I see you. I know that women are carrying still a lot of the mental load with careers and families and trying to juggle all the plates and keep them spinning. And it is important, so important for you to make time for yourself, that you need to have relationships outside of your husband and your children, if they're still in your home, that you need to have hobbies and interests that aren't all about your family. Self-care, and I don't just mean laying on the couch watching TV, which you can do, perfectly okay to have an hour of that and binge watch your favorite show, but also just things like making sure you're getting enough sleep, drinking water, not being busy and productive all the time. That kind of, again, the guilt that comes with, well, if I'm not working, I need to do stuff around the house and get my to-do list. So there's this pressure for this internal to-do list of getting everything done in a day. And self-care for women tends to be last because we're still, at least in this culture, trained to put other people's needs above our own. And that can only last so long without there being a breakdown in mental or physical health or both. And so you need to prioritize time for yourself. And it's harder the younger your kids are. I understand that. It's still just as important. So you may not be able to do an hour a day, obviously, but maybe you can carve out 15 minutes after the kids go to bed where you're not scrolling on your phone necessarily, where you're exercising, doing some meditation, doing something that sort of is restorative in some way that's just you, for you. And sometimes we won't ask because we feel like we're being selfish. So that's not being selfish. Just allow that you can have space for you so that you are in a better place to take care of the people around you.
Well, thanks for that, Tammy. And thanks for hanging out with us and exploring a bit about your story and who you're serving. Anything else on your side, Marie?
I just want to say thank you again for meeting. I appreciate it so much. And like that advice, I think I feel like it's needed. Like I think a lot of people forget like the importance of just like taking time and like having to like, you know what, I'm not selfish for this. Like I actually need this. And I love what you said about like taking care of yourself so you can take care of others. It is so important. So I do really appreciate that.
Yeah, you can't pour from an empty cup. And it's been a pleasure. I appreciate the time with you guys.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Tammy. You can find her info on riversidecounseling.net and out here on the interwebs. Hopefully we'll see you again soon and kind of explore some more topics together. But thanks for your time and we'll see you soon.
Great. Looking forward to it. Thanks.